This meeting is now being recorded.
Hello, and thank you for joining SIA's webinar entitled SIA Semiconductors by the Numbers, an Insider's Look at the SIA Factbook Data. My name is Fulan Yanug. I'm SIA's Director for Industry Statistics and Economic Policy, and I'm being joined by Shelley Van Dyke, Market Intelligence Manager for Freescale Semiconductor, which is a SIA charter member. Hello, Shelley.
Hello, Fulan.
Shelley also serves on the Board of Directors for the World Semiconductor Industry Statistics Program, the singular source for monthly primary source industry shipment statistics. Originally created in the 1990s as the Databook, the SIA Factbook is the definitive local data and trends on the semiconductor industry. This dataset offers a rich analysis and insight into long-term industry trends, global market trends, product segment information, capital expenditures, and more. We recently republished at the end of 2014 the Databook, now called the Factbook, and it's currently available on the SIA website. The Factbook is an original source document used across the industry for insight and historic trends spanning the last 20 years. During this webinar, we hope to help you learn about the following things. One, how to access and leverage the charts, graphs, and stats within the Factbook with confidence for your own uses. Two, long-term sales and market trends unique to the industry and the methodology behind the numbers. Three, how SIA uses these valuable statistics to inform our policy priorities. All right, well, let me start by providing a brief outline for today's webinar. The agenda consists of three sections. The webinar should take a total about 30 minutes. I'll begin with a brief overview of SIA's major takeaway messages and how data supports these messages. Shelley will then dive more deeply into the contents of the Factbook by highlighting several tables and figures from the 2014 Factbook. And finally, I'll conclude with the webinar by explaining a bit of how SIA uses data to support its advocacy efforts on behalf of the industry by presenting several examples as well as providing resources and tools that you can use to learn about and effectively advocate for the industry. Okay, so let me start with a brief overview of SIA, our major takeaway messages, and how we use data to support these messages. So founded in 1977 by 5 microelectronics pioneers, SIA unites the following companies which account for over 80% of America's semiconductor sales annually. Through this coalition, SIA seeks to strengthen U.S. leadership, semiconductor design, and manufacturing by working with Congress, the administration, and other key industry stakeholders to encourage policies and regulations that fuel innovation, propel business, and drive international competition. SIA is the voice of the U.S. semiconductor industry, and as we will explain today, one of America's top export industries and a key driver of America's economic strength, national security, and global competitiveness. Semiconductors enable the systems and products that we use to work, communicate, travel, entertain, harness energy, treat illness, and make new scientific discoveries. The semiconductor industry directly employs nearly 250,000 people in the United States. In 2013, the U.S. semiconductor company sales totaled $155 billion, and semiconductors make the global trillion-dollar electronics industry possible. One of the key tools SIA uses to advocate on behalf of the industry is data. We believe the U.S. semiconductor industry has a great story to tell about its value and importance to our country, our economy, and even our individual lives. To tell this story, we often rely on arguments supported by data and statistics. Before we get into the details of the Factbook and other industry data, let me first provide SIA's key takeaway messages. This slide provides the 3 top-level messages or themes that we consistently try to convey to policymakers and the general public. 1, semiconductors strengthen our country. 2, they build our future, and 3, they improve our lives. As this visual shows, these top-line messages are strengthened and supported, actually literally in the pictures, by data. Our goal is to create a well-synthesized theme that provides clear and compelling messages about the industry supported by data and facts. Expanding a bit from our key takeaways, SIA also uses data to provide a picture or profile of the industry to policymakers or people outside the industry that we often interact with. This slide, which is often one of the first ones we present to audiences, highlights certain data-backed facts about the industry that we feel are particularly compelling. Once we are able to establish the importance and value of the industry to our audience, then we are more likely to convince our audience to support our particular Shelley Van Dyke of SIA member company Freescale Semiconductor to provide an overview of the 2014 SIA Factbook.
Thank you, Falon. So if we can go to the next slide. The data included in the 2014 SIA Factbook, as Falon mentioned, helps demonstrate the strength and promise of the U.S. semiconductor industry and why it is critical for policymakers to enact measures that boost growth and promote innovation. The U.S. semiconductor industry is a key driver of America's economic strength, global competitiveness, and technology leadership, and that is the overall theme that the Factbook attempts to convey with this data. So as Falon mentioned, it is available on the website. It is broken into 5 sections: industry overview, global market, capital and R&D investment, jobs, and productivity. I'm going to highlight several tables and figures from the first 3 sections of the Factbook. Go to the next page, please. So first, let's set the U.S. industry in context to the global semiconductor industry, which is shown in this slide. The global semiconductor industry continues to be a key growth sector in the global economy. Worldwide semiconductor sales increased from $77 billion in 1993 to $306 billion in 2013, an average annual rate of increase of 7.1% per year. According to the WSTF semiconductor industry forecast issued in December of 2014, the worldwide semiconductor industry sales are forecasted to reach $345 billion in 2015 and grow another few billion to $355 billion in 2016. Next slide, please. So this slide shows how the U.S. semiconductor industry has performed over time in terms of market share compared to the semiconductor industries in other countries. So this share is based on the headquarters of the seller selling the completed semiconductor into the end consumer. Currently, the United States semiconductor industry has over half of the global market share. The Americas-based firms have held the largest share since the mid-1990s, with over 50% share in 2013. Japan's headquarters share has declined over time from 50% in 1987, not shown on this chart, to about 15% in 2013. Firms in Asia have seen share increasing over time. We can go to the next. So on this, we see the regional semiconductor markets. It's interesting to note that U.S.-based semiconductor companies do maintain market share leadership in most of the major regional semiconductor markets. In 2013, semiconductor firms based in the Americas held over 50% of the total semiconductor market, as we saw in the previous slide. And in all other major markets besides Japan, the U.S. headquartered companies held around half the market. In Japan, one of the world's largest single country markets, U.S. firms held only 33% share. Historically, foreign headquartered companies have held a relatively lower share of the Japanese market than in all other markets. If we go to the next slide. I'm going to move from industry trends to market trends. And this slide highlights the leading global end uses for semiconductors as a percent share of the total market. The vast majority of semiconductor sales demand is driven by products ultimately purchased by consumers. This includes PCs for home and business use, and currently the rapid development of mobile devices such as cell phones and tablets. Increasingly, new demand is also driven in emerging markets, including those in Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Africa. Next, please. Semiconductor technology has rapidly evolved as the industry develops more advanced product and process technologies for applications in the end-use industries. In recent years, the largest segments of the worldwide semiconductor industry have been logic, memory, microprocessor, and analog. In 2013, these products accounted for 77% of the total semiconductor industry sales. We'll move to the next slide, please. This slide shows regional distribution of where semiconductors are shipped or consumed. The pink line shows the Asia Pacific market, which has quadrupled in size since 2001, from $40 billion to over $174 billion in 2013. In the early 1980s, the largest worldwide semiconductor market was the Americas. However, the Americas' share of worldwide consumption eroded throughout the mid to late 1980s. Japan became the largest regional market in 1986, largely due to its thriving electronics industry. The size of the Americas market surpassed Japan in 1993 due to the strength of its computer and telecommunications sectors, and that's shown on the blue line in the graph. In 2001, the Asia Pacific market surpassed all other regional markets in sales as electronic equipment production shifted to the region. This data reflects sales of semiconductors to electronic equipment makers only. Final products are then shipped out of those regions for consumption around the world. Next, please. I'm going to turn to look at industry capital and R&D spending trends. These are two important metrics for the industry. To remain competitive in the semiconductor industry, firms must continually invest a significant share of revenues in both R&D and new plants and equipment. The pace of technological changes in the industry requires that companies develop more complex process technology and introduce production machinery capable of manufacturing components with smaller and smaller feature sizes. The ability to produce state-of-the-art semiconductor components can only be maintained through a continual commitment to keeping pace with industry-wide investment rates. This investment rate is roughly 30% of sales for the capital and R&D. The need to stay on the leading edge of technology has resulted in some extreme fluctuations in years such as 2001, when sales declined very rapidly, but expenditures on R&D and capital equipment didn't decline at the same rate. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the total R&D and capital expenditures by U.S. semiconductor firms, including the fabless companies, was $50.3 billion in 2013. During the 1993 to 2013 period, the average annual growth rate was approximately 20%. The investment levels in dollar terms have not been subject to fluctuations associated with the silicon cycle, but they are influenced by the global business cycle, such as global recessions. Next, please. So this chart measures comparative rates of R&D spending by industry. It's a pretty compelling chart. The rate of U.S. semiconductor industry R&D spending is unsurpassed in key high technology industrial sectors. Based on the 2013 European Union Industrial R&D Investment Scoreboard, the semiconductor industry led all manufacturing sectors in the rate of R&D spending as a percent of sales. This ranking for the U.S. semiconductor industry is pretty typical annually. In the semiconductor industry, high levels of R&D spending as a percent of sales is not just a requirement to be competitive, but really a requirement to even participate in the industry. If we move to the next slide, cover the sources and methodology behind the fact book. So the primary source data comes from the WSTS, which is largely contributed from member companies, and publicly available company data such as the United States SEC filings, official government data including the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Department of Commerce, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and U.S. patent filings. Secondary sources are from leading market research firms covering the semiconductor industry. Now I'd like to turn the presentation back to Salon.
Thank you, Shelley. Besides being a helpful reference and source of long-term industry and market trends for the U.S. semiconductor industry, the Factbook is one of the key tools SIA has developed to help us achieve our policy objectives. I'll now spend some time explaining how we use data in the Factbook as well as other data sources to support our advocacy efforts. First, I want to show you SIA's Policy Roadmap for 2015. In essence, these are the key issues we would like policymakers to focus on, and for every issue, we specify key actions that policymakers take. For example, the issues in the first bullet are related to markets and intellectual property, which are key issues for our industry. And what we want policymakers to do is to basically facilitate open markets and to protect intellectual property, broadly speaking. From these actions would stem more specific policy advocacy messages, for example, support of specific trade agreements to facilitate open markets, put strong actions and efforts and laws in foreign countries where U.S. semiconductor firms operate. Now, this map shows you the challenge that we as industry face in our advocacy efforts and why data is a particularly important tool given these set of challenges. This map provides the U.S. semiconductor industry's employment footprint by state. Darker shaded states have higher numbers of semiconductor workers, and lighter states have less. Our industry challenge is simply that we do not have a more widely distributed employment footprint. Policymakers, especially politicians, certainly care about voters and more specifically about votes in getting elected. And for policymakers, they are more likely to care about our policy priorities and take action on them if they represent voters who work in our industry. Now, this is great when SIA engages with officials from California, Texas, and New York, for example. However, effectively engaging with such policymakers from states shaded in the lightest red is more challenging because these policymakers have less of a self-interest to engage with and support our industry simply because they have fewer voters in their states that would work in the semiconductor industry. Oftentimes I contrast our industry with, for example, the banking industry or the retail industry, where in every single district in the United States, there's often a bank or a store or a restaurant, like for the restaurant industry, which provides a different, a unique challenge for our industry in that respect. What this means is that in order for us to be effective with a broader audience and successfully expand our circle of influence, we need to make the industry important to all policymakers, and this is where data comes into play. For example, we can expand the employment footprint map to include not just direct semiconductor jobs, but also jobs that the semiconductor industry creates indirectly. By doing this, we can argue that the semiconductor industry has a strong effect on promoting jobs throughout the United States, even in states that do not have significant numbers of direct semiconductor employees. Why? Because the semiconductor employment multiplier is relatively high compared to other industries at 4.89. This is to say that basically for every one semiconductor job in the United States, that job supports roughly an additional 5 other jobs in our economy, either upstream jobs or further downstream jobs. from our industry. Now, this is a message that will get policymaker attention and support our overall message of how the semiconductor industry strengthens our country. We can also emphasize how the semiconductor industry disproportionately supports the broader U.S. economy and therefore supports voters and workers across America. Now, similar to the previous slide on the industry employment multiplier, this slide is not issue specific, but rather is what we like to call evergreen material, or as I like to say, material that helps explain to people why the U.S. semiconductor industry is important and why you should listen to us and support our industry. Now, this argument about the U.S. semiconductor industry's contribution to U.S. economic growth is particularly compelling and something we took much effort in researching. In fact, this slide is based on a longer white paper, which is on our website that provides the details of our research on this topic. What this slide in essence conveys is the U.S. semiconductor industry is both large relative to most other manufacturing industries, and at the same time, it is fast growing. Now, most industries are either one or the other, but rarely are they both relatively large and also relatively fast growing. Now, by being both, the U.S. semiconductor industry has contributed more to U.S. economic growth, that is to say GDP growth, than any other major manufacturing industry over the past 25 years. Again, this is a positive message that will get policymakers' attention, and it supports our overall argument of how the semiconductor industry strengthens our country. Like job creation, it is hard to argue against an industry that creates such economic growth. Now, a couple observations about relying on data to make policy arguments. First, if you're going to rely on data to tell your story, it is important to get the numbers right. Our data arguments, especially those included in the fact book and those used for our evergreen material, have been closely reviewed and explained in a longer white paper, which is available on our website. The second observation, when possible, we try to rely on primary source industry data or official government data. For example, the data in this slide is from DEA, and the jobs data in the previous slide is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Most of the factbook data is from the WSTS primary source material or member companies directly. And one challenge we face as an industry association is trying to differentiate our industry and its importance from the rest of IT. Today, when people hear of Silicon Valley, they often immediately think or envision Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Twitter, these type of companies. Now, while our industry may not be as visible to the consumer as some of the rest of IT represented by such great American companies that I just alluded to, we think our industry's role in powering the rest of IT is in fact more important to innovation and contributes to our positive story. Our differentiating message is that the semiconductor industry is really a foundational industry upon which the rest of IT and really the rest of the broader economy builds its innovation. We have highlighted in a recent white paper some academic research in this area led by Professor Dale Jorgensen of Harvard, who has attempted to quantify industry sources of economic growth caused by innovation. And the conclusions are that the semiconductor industry contributes a significant amount of economic growth due to innovation in the U.S. economy. But also, much of the innovation from other IT industries is built upon the foundational innovation laid down by the semiconductor industry. Now, besides evergreen information, we also use data to highlight issue-specific areas, which I will highlight in the next two slides. This slide here shows that semiconductors are among the leading U.S. manufactured exports. Again, supporting exports, especially as a driver of American jobs, is a position that policymakers would likely support. Most people, however, including policymakers, are actually unlikely to know that semiconductors are perennially a leading U.S. export product. Such trade data, once shown and explained to people, can help them support our policy efforts for free and open markets and the promotion of free trade agreements that enable freer and more open markets. Now, this data is official government data from the U.S. International Trade Commission. Here's another example of data-supported information. This data is from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and it explains our industry's focus on IP and support for strong IP laws and enforcement around the world. From looking at this slide, we've highlighted in blue semiconductor companies in the top 15 in terms of total U.S. patents granted in 2014. A full third of all of the top 15 companies that received patents in 2014 were semiconductor companies. Now, from looking at this slide, one could easily argue that no other U.S. industry is more dependent on strong IP protection, and specifically, in this case, patent protection, than the U.S. semiconductor industry. We've come to the end of our presentation. It's about half hour, so right on time. Now, besides highlighting the recently released SIA Factbook, the complete version of which is available on the SIA website at www.semiconductors.org, we also reviewed some basic data and information we use to support our advocacy efforts on behalf of the industry. I'd like to end with this slide, which contains links to some tools and resources that you can access and use. Our industry has done some phenomenal things, and we, like I said before, have a really great story to tell. Hopefully, these resources and tools can help show you how semiconductors improve our lives, strengthen our country, and ultimately build our future. And finally, we have listed our names and emails, and we encourage you to contact us anytime with follow-up questions and comments. Shelley, thank you very much for presenting doing this presentation with me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Philon. I appreciate the opportunity and hope people go out and read the fact book.
All right, excellent. And I want to thank everyone else for paying attention to this webinar. Thank you very much.